All right, number one. So we're just going to do a ton of example problems here. So number one, you have 5x to the fifth times negative 3x squared. To solve this out, what you need to do, and you can either do this in your head or write it down on paper, it doesn't really matter. But what you can do is you can separate the numbers, so the regular old numbers here, 5 times negative 3, and separate that out from the variables, x to the fifth and x squared. Some of you do not need to break this down. You'll just look at it and go, oh, it's negative 15 and then x to the seventh. But if you're not one of those people, then that's fine. Then just write it out. As long as you stay organized, I'm going to give you a ton of time on the test. So there is time for you to write this stuff down. This part right here is negative 15. Okay? But this involves an exponent property. They have the same base. So one way of looking at this is you can go, well, it's x to the fifth. Well, that's just x times x times x times x times x. So that's this part. Times x squared, that's just times x times x. Okay? If you notice, they are all x's. Okay? When it's like that, you can combine them. But if they were y's, like say it was like x to the fifth times y squared, you cannot combine those. Okay? Because it's x's and y's. X times y is just xy. You can't bring them together. Okay? So this only works when the bases are the same. And what essentially you can do here is you can just count, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's just x to the seventh. And the negative 15 comes down. This is your final answer. But there's shortcuts, and that's kind of what I want to go over today. Okay? The main thing is with shortcuts is if you multiply things like x to the fifth and x squared, all you have to do, instead of writing x down a million times, because that's annoying, just add 5 and 2 and you get 7. That's what this says right here. I write my 7th weird. Yes. X to the seventh. Yeah. Are there any questions on this? This should be review, but it's still going to be on your test. So even though you know it already, then it's going to be even better that you've seen it. And you have seen this, right? I don't know if it was cut off with what happened in March. March of last year is what I'm saying. You probably know that. Okay. Number 2. So that was multiplying. Now we're going to do one that involves dividing. If you know how to do this your own way, then just don't even bother paying attention to what I'm doing. But what I'm going to do is write 3 times x times x times x times x times x, 5, divided by, this one's 2x to the fourth, so that means it's 2x times 2x times 2x times 2x. Okay? Essentially what exponents are, you probably already know this, but it's similar to multiplying. Okay? When you do 5 times 3, you're really doing 3 plus 3 plus 3, don't write this down, plus 3. So this times 5 is saying how many times you add. The exponent is telling you how many times you multiply. That's all it is. And again, you probably know that already, but just in case you didn't. Okay. From here, you can combine all the numbers. So there's a 2, 2, 2, and 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times another 2 is 16. So at the bottom, you can have a 16 times, and then there's all these x's here. Actually, I'm just going to write down all the x's over again. And we still have the 3 times, and then the 5 x's at the top. I'm just going to copy and paste it because I'm lazy. And, well, x over x, as long as x isn't 0, is going to cancel. So the x over x is 1 over 1. X over x is 1 over 1. 1 over 1. 1 over 1. Okay. Then you're left with 3x on top over 16 for the final answer. Okay. This is the long way of doing it. Okay. If you wanted, this is the short way. I don't care which way you do it either. Okay. What you could have done is 3x to the 5th, and then you're dividing it by 2 to the 4th times x to the 4th. You can distribute these when it's just one term in there. Okay, 2 to the 4th is 16, which is what we got the original time through. You notice it's 16. That's what this is, 2 to the 4th. Okay. We have 3 to the x, 3x to the 5th, I'm sorry, times 16x to the 4th. Now what you can do for dividing is just subtract exponents. So now it's 3/16. That's a number. So it's not an exponent. We don't need to worry about that. X to the 5th over x to the 4th, you can just subtract those. And you end up with 3/16 x to the 1st, which you don't really need to do the first. But if you notice, it's the same answer as what we got the long way. Okay. You can use the shortcut way. In fact, you really should at this point because it's just going to save you a ton of time. But when in doubt, just write everything out and then cancel it. If you have x to some power times x to some other power, you add. Okay. If you don't know that, write it down. If you know it, then don't worry about it. Okay, that's the first rule. The second rule, if you're dividing, then you subtract. Okay. The next rule is if you had something like x to the a, and there's like some value in here, and you're raising this all to the b power, it's the same thing as c to the b times x to the ab. So this time you multiply. There's a c to the first here essentially, and b times 1 is b, a times b is that one. So these are the 3 rules basically so far that we have. There's a couple more, but they're really basic. For example, x to the 0 is equal to what? Anybody, just yell it out. Anything to the 0 power is what? 1. Okay, so that's another rule. So again, if you're one of those people that don't have these memorized, then just write all these down and then you can use them later. Okay, number 3 is, this one's a good one. 3 over x squared to the negative 3 power. Okay. There are multiple ways of doing this. Let's see, should I do it the long way? Doesn't matter. All right. So one thing, this is another property, is whenever there's negative exponents like this, what you can do is just shift the whole thing to whatever the opposite side is. So right now this is on the bottom, so you can throw it on the top. But if you switch sides with it, you have to switch the sign to a positive. Okay. A power to a power, you multiply, so your answer would be 3x to the 6th. Okay. Now the long way of doing it, I'll show you the long way, just in case people are doing it that way. The negative, you have to know that it just flips. There's no real shortcut for that one. But this one, you could have done x squared 3 times. That's what that means. And then from here, you can add these. Remember the rule of adding them. 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6, so you get 3x to the 6th. You get the same answer either way. Your answer should always be in the form of the following here. I'll write this up here. It should always be some constant times x to the n. So it should look something like this when you're doing these problems. It'll always say that in the instructions, but like this one right here, the k is negative 15, x to the n is 7. So it looks like it follows that format still. This one is 3x over 16. Well, 3 over 16 is the k, x to the first is the x to the n. This one, 3x to the 6th, is kind of self-explanatory. But they're supposed to look like this, long story short, by the end. Let's write a value in here. So say I had something like x to the negative a. That's equal to 1 over x to the a. And another way of looking at this is if you did 1 over x to the negative a, that's equal to x to the a. Because you throw it on top, you have to switch the sign. This one's negative, so you threw it on the bottom and it has to switch the sign. Because technically this is over 1. And this should all be review. All right, any questions? All right, number 4. I'm gonna start mixing these properties up then, just so you can get a practice. So this one you're gonna have a multiply, but I'm mixing it with a divide as well. Hey, take a couple seconds, work that out, and then we'll go over it, and then you can kind of compare with what I got. Excuse me. Everyone has an answer? So this one's going to be adding these two up, so you get x to the first, over x to the 9th. The next step is you subtract. You're going to end up with x to the -8, because 1 minus 9 is -8. Okay, it's one way of doing it. Another way you could have done it is if you threw the x to the -3 on the bottom right away, which is more work, but that's okay. Say you threw it on the bottom. Okay, now we can add the bottoms here. So you end up with x to the 4th over x to the 12th. And now you subtract 4 minus 12 is -8. So again, you get x is equal to, you get the answer to be x to the -8 power.